Hey guys, Enter the Stars, and as promised, Killing Jesus, Decoded, the mini-series by Ridley Scott, released on March 29th, the 88th day of the year, the day that I believe that Jesus was crucified in 36 AD. The book, released on September 24th, when you convert that from the Gregorian to Julian, it's 9/11, the day Jesus was born. In 6 BC, Jesus was 40 years old when he died. They hide these things in plain sight to mock the Creator, because no one will ever believe it. Now, if you have any doubts about when Jesus was born and crucified, type in enter this 5T4OZ Jesus and eclipse, and I have several videos on the signs in the sky that occurred during Jesus' 40-year life. Several eclipses that mirror the dates, modern dates, of mass sacrifice, and they do this to smear the name of Christ and smear his legacy. In the opening of this film, we already get references to the wolf, to Anubis, the dog head. At the beginning of Jesus' life, when he was about 10 years old, they go to Egypt.
Here in this land of dog-headed gods, I made great efforts teaching my son our scripture.
In this land of dog-headed gods, that is Anubis, the wolf god of ancient Egypt. Let's take a look at the rest of this miniseries. Now, the errors begin in this miniseries with John the Baptist having to convince Jesus that he was the Son of God, and Jesus denying that at first. And then Jesus goes into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights, and that is another giveaway as to the length of his life. We see also synchronicities with the baptism theme that Jesus had in the signaling of the coming of Aquarius, which would be the time of his return, though no man knows the day nor the hour. And we saw this water theme in the 40 days and 40 nights that the flood took place in the ark, and also the 40 years in the wilderness of the Israelites. All of these things pointing forward to Jesus' 40 days being tempted, and also his 40-year life. So as Jesus begins his ministry, he's very unsure about himself in this film. And they start out with a very controversial sermon that he gives on the street about what do you do when someone strikes you? And these men say, an eye for an eye. And Jesus says, no, turn the other cheek. And a lot of people have some problems with that particular thinking, especially in today's day and age. But I believe what Jesus was talking about is a new way to live. And because of his sacrifice, the covenant would change. Up until that point in history, it was an eye for an eye, and especially under certain covenants and certain laws. But when Jesus came, he erased the old covenant, and he provided a new way to live. In other words, live through love. And through loving people, we draw them to Christ. Now, the misinformation continues as Jesus is standing in front of the temple, and they portray him here as trying to incite a riot, saying that this temple will be thrown down and not one stone will be standing, and basically calling out the Pharisees in front of the crowd. But that's not how the story happened. Jesus did say that the temple will be torn down and that it'd be rebuilt in 3 days. And he was talking about his own self. That is, that he would be crucified, but then be resurrected in 3 days. So, this is a common misconception about Jesus, that he had a violent side, and that he was a hypocrite, and that sometimes he's talked about peace and love, and then other times he was inciting violence, and that he said that he would return with the sword. And that is simply not the case. Jesus taught peace, but then those of us who don't choose to go in that direction, we have to live with the choice we make. This is the period of grace. Now I want you to consider for a minute the prophecy of Genesis about the snake bruising her in the heel and her bruising the snake in the head. And this is the dance that she does, and the requests that he brings her the head of John the Baptist. And as she dances around the pole, it is the serpent dancing around the tree of life. Okay? And that's what this scene is all about. And it's all about the Genesis prophecy of the Ouroboros, the snake eating its tail. That is the dollar symbol you're looking at right now. That is the mechanism by which Satan separates us from God and from each other. So you see, the head of John the Baptist has significance. It is the defiance of the serpent, basically saying, I was the one that was supposed to be bruised in the head, but instead I'm going to take your faithful servant and I'm going to cut his head off. Now this is the scene where Jesus is confronted about paying taxes and asked if they should pay taxes. And I believe that this is the most misinterpreted scripture in the Bible, in almost every religion today. When Jesus says, give Caesar's things to Caesar and God's things to God. There's a precedent in the Bible, another story about Jesus going to pay tribute, and he makes the disciple go and find a fish. He says, the first fish that you catch will have a coin in its mouth. And he says to give that to Caesar. He asked the disciple if Caesar's children have to pay taxes. And in fact, the answer was no. And then he tells the disciple, you're the son of the living God. So why would you pay taxes to me? In the same way, Caesar's children do not pay taxes to Caesar. And I believe when Jesus says, give Caesar's things to Caesar and God's things to God, what he's really saying is Caesar needs your money because he's a man, and God does not need your money because he's a God. And that is the perfect answer, demonstrating that Jesus is the master of the universe and the king, and he doesn't need our money. He didn't need it back then for his church, and he doesn't need it now. Jesus roamed the streets and loved people. There wasn't one transaction of money. So imagine the abomination of collecting tithe and putting guilt of people needing to raise money for churches. That is my personal feeling, and I believe it is the truth. In the same way that all of us can come together on this channel without money involved, and we can love each other, offer support, and find the truth. And that's why Jesus came and was a carpenter. He came as a carpenter and could have built the most majestic church, but he didn't. You see, Jesus came to show us a different way. Demonstrated that when the woman was going to be stoned for her sin, the old law, the Torah law, did not apply after Jesus' coming. So when you hear people talk about tithe being applicable because it was something that was done in the Old Testament, Jesus came to change much of that. And a strange thing occurs in Jesus' life. He actually was the example by which we are to live our lives. He built his church without the need for tithe. It wasn't mentioned once during his life. Jesus did not go to a building to worship. He worshiped in the streets. Jesus did not pray in public often. He mostly prayed alone. And our modern churches are so far from the truth. They are so far from Jesus' example. Money is in the temple in our modern churches through not only tithe, but the 501c3 tax-exempt status. The status that prevents any church from keeping their doors open without having that status, because economically it would not be feasible. And so now you know the truth. Now, in this scene, we watch Jesus as one of the apostles cuts off the ear of the Roman soldier, a popular story. And of course, this is the scene from the 40-year-old virgin, and Jesus cured the blind. But he mimics Jesus Christ in the miracles that he performed. We saw the curing of the blind. And then he asked the little girl if she likes magic. There's the miracle of Jesus healing the ear of the soldier. There's the silver. He was betrayed by Judas. And then we see the rubber ear. So you see, Jesus was born on 9/11, and he was crucified on the 88th day of the year. And everybody thinks, the whole world is deceived into thinking that Jesus was 33 years old when he died, or that he was crucified in 33 AD, none of which is true. And you see, Jesus is the 40-year-old virgin. And that's when he was crucified, on the 88th day of the year in 36 AD, when he was 40 years old. And this is how they make fun of the Son of God. Take care and be safe, you guys.